Hi, everyone. This is Sharon Meyer speaking. I'm the integrative nutritionist at the Institute for Health and Healing, and thank you for joining. So today we're talking about food for the brain, right? Food, mood food, that sort of thing. It sort of picks up from the last conversation or talk I had before. So let's start thinking about this. Because moods, of course, are impacted by so many different things that we do, we want to make sure that we can improve those moods. I don't know about you, but there are certainly some foods that affect me, and I can wake up the next day feeling a little bit blue. And everybody's going to be very different, right? Can you think of any foods that affect you? Just check it out and see. And if you wake up feeling a little bit maybe anxious or depressed, or a little bit down in the dumps, or just not feeling yourself, just think back of what you've eaten in the last day or two, eaten or drunk anything, and see how you feel. Because invariably, we're all very different, and we all can have different reactions to different foods. So just check it out. It's a great experience or experiment too. So when we think about food and we think about what the brain requires, there are certainly great foods that are going to make a big impact. But one of the worst foods is going to be what? Sugar. You guessed it. Sugar in every single form. Sugar in all its form, it wreaks serious havoc on our brains. It causes mental health issues. It decreases our cognitive function, and there's even a link with dementia with it. We know that sugar acts like an addictive substance. It lights up some of the areas of your brain, the same as you would do if you were doing cocaine. We know that it's addictive from that point of view. And it can directly contribute to depression and increase anxiety. And then, of course, too much sugar can cause insulin resistance. And insulin resistance in the brain is not something you want to be having an issue with, because it's linked with all the cognitive diseases, including Alzheimer's. So all the cells in our body use up glucose for energy. And because your brain is home to so many nerve cells, it also ends up using the majority of glucose in your body for fuel. Your brain needs some glucose to function, and even those people on the strictest keto diet, there is a certain amount of glucose because the body couldn't function without it. It's just how much of it that we actually have. So we know that sugar can cause addiction. Everyone knows you can easily get addicted to substances like heroin or cocaine, but so can you with sugar. In fact, I have found that most people coming off sugar have more of a problem than anything else they think they have some sort of affinity to. They find it even more difficult to kick than something like coffee. So we just want to make sure that we start to reduce the amount of sugar that we consume. And when I talk about sugar, I'm also talking about refined carbohydrates. So the carbohydrates where all the nutrients have been stripped away, the fiber has been stripped away. All of this has a major impact on the function of our body. And coming off sugar is hard. I think I mentioned last week that there are many things that we need to do when we do this withdrawal, because it is so difficult. And the first week is not fun at all. Most people feel very uncomfortable, and the craving for that sugar becomes overwhelming. It is very addictive. But what we do know is that if we don't, there's that whole contribution to depression. One of the primary causes of depression is the hormone serotonin, or specifically the lack of serotonin. And sugar really messes up with the body's ability to produce serotonin, which of course can lead to the depression. So we know that in the gut, most of the serotonin, 90% of the serotonin is produced in the gut. So if the function of your gut is compromised from overloading it with too much sugar or too many refined carbohydrates, you're going to have trouble not only with important gut functions like your digestion, but your immune cell formation, and then, of course, the serotonin production as well. And also what's fascinating about this is that too much sugar impacts the brain's ability to produce and to use up that serotonin. The other part, too, is it impacts how we absorb B vitamins. And we need B vitamins for many functions in the body, but we certainly need them for the function of the brain. It also contributes to anxiety. So sugar abuse initiates a blood sugar roller coaster. So you know my whole link with the bagel. Eat the bagel, break down, gets secreted into the glucose, gets secreted into the blood very quickly, and insulin's job is to chaperone that glucose into the cell, and then your blood sugar crashes. Then there's a craving for some more sugar or carbohydrates. It raises your blood sugar. The same thing happens. Insulin chaperones that glucose, and your blood sugar crashes. And so you have these peaks and troughs. And for some people, that could be a continuous function through the course of the day. And when you have all of those things happening, that blood sugar plummeting, the brain will react by sending out a panicked adrenaline alarm, and this leads to anxiety. So when you eat too much sugar, the amount of protein, this particular protein, which is a brain-derived neurotrophic factor, decreases. And BDNF plays such an important role in reducing anxiety, panic, and stress reactions. So a deficiency can exacerbate those conditions. So it's about how do we control the blood sugar, right? So it comes back to, so what are those foods that are important for how we get the brain to function? Well, the first place that we would go is cut that sugar out. Absolutely imperative, not only for the brain, but certainly for all the cells and all the organs in the body. And what would be the most important thing that we would start to add to our food? That would be fat. The brain works really, really, really well with fat. And different types of fat, too. Remember that brain is 60% fat. So if we're eating more fat, you're going to see an improvement in the craving for carbohydrate, but it also controls your blood sugar. We know that protein and fat reduces that massive increase in glucose into the bloodstream. So it just controls it. You don't have so many very highs and so many very lows. It just keeps things as very much moderated through the day. And what happens is that when you increase the fat, you reduce the craving for sugar. So you got that with the sugar, right? No more to be said about that. Good. The other thing, too, is we want to make sure that there's some very good fermented food, because we know that there's that link between the gut and the brain, the gut and the skin, the gut and the liver, but there's almost like this highway between the digestive system and the brain. So we want to feed the gut bacteria, which in itself, from there, is going to feed the brain. So we want to be using some of the prebiotic foods and the probiotic foods. So the prebiotic foods are foods that the gut bacteria then ferment and produce short-chain fatty acids, which is what's required in the colon, but all of the cells in the body do very well with it, short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, because it's good for reducing inflammation. So prebiotic foods would be things like artichokes, Jerusalem artichokes, sweet potatoes, plantains, onions, garlic, leeks, asparagus, bananas. If you're eating the bananas, they shouldn't be very ripe and got brown spots all over them, because then they're not a great food to be eating. Greener, harder bananas would be better. Lotus root would be good. Taro, miso, jicama, chicory. Those are the prebiotic fibers or foods. They have the fibers that the gut bacteria specifically function well with or converting into butyrate. Then we've got probiotic foods. These are the fermented vegetables, sauerkraut, kimchi, the pickled vegetables, and then there's dairy. So for those of you that can tolerate dairy, then it's not such a bad food for your gut and therefore your brain too. But you need to make sure that you are one of those people that tolerate it well. And the only way we can test that is to eliminate it for a while, like 3 to 4 weeks, and then bring back certain parts of dairy. So it could be cheese or the yogurt. Don't drink milk. So the yogurts would be, dairy would be yogurt or some ricotta or cottage cheese or kefir or goat cheese, sheep's cheese, cow's cheese. All of those foods have been fermented already. So it's a little easier on the digestive system. And see how you do with that. It's not just about a lactase intolerance, remember. It has to be a reaction to the whey protein in there and also the casein. Both of those are proteins. If you do have a problem, you can always use the probiotic foods that are dairy-free. So coconut yogurt, water kefir, cashew yogurt, all of the other alternative dairy products that we can get now. Kombucha, I hate to say kombucha because everybody jumps onto the whole kombucha thing, and kombucha is not the thing that cures everything. It's not the cure-all for everything, but be careful with the kombucha because there's a lot of sugar involved with that too. Beet kvass, fermented beverages, all of those are going to impact the brain because it's via the gut. And then probiotic supplements are important. It's interesting that sometimes with probiotic supplements, I have seen people sleep better, their moods have improved, they have less anxiety, less depression. It comes back to that gut-brain function. The next thing, so that's feeding the gut. The other part is about carbohydrates. Which carbohydrates should we be consuming? Well, we certainly don't want the refined carbohydrates. So that's going to be white bread, white pasta. It's not going to be very good to have things like cookies, cakes. Not only is it sugar, but then there's also the gluten thing. And for a lot of people, gluten is very impactful to the brain, can promote some of the inflammation too. Now, a lot of people, if they're eating gluten or they have a gluten sensitivity, feel it in the gut. But then a lot of other people feel it in their moods. I'm one of those people, when I'm eating a lot of gluten, I can start to feel a little bit just blue, just not my happy stuff. And so for many of people, gluten should be one of those things that you eliminate from the diet, for sure. And if you are going to eat it, then it should be sourdough and very, very limited. So if you are some of those folks that don't have a problem with that, that would be fine. But it has been known to cause some mood, depression, anxiety too. So dairy and gluten are top of the list to avoid where you can. Some of the other carbohydrates would be fine. So if you were doing sweet potatoes and you did some olive oil with that, that would be probably one of the better things to be having. So let's talk about protein. Protein, probably one of the top foods for the brain is going to be the eggs. Again, if you don't have a problem with eggs. So eggs have things like choline in them, and this is needed for cell membranes and cell signaling. It's needed to make acetylcholine in it, which is a transmitter and is really a neurotransmitter and is really important for the brain and for neurological function. And again, it's great protein and it's got fat and it's got the protein in it, which is good for the function of blood sugar and controlling blood sugar and insulin. Now, the other part is you can also have any of the other meat or animal protein, so chicken and meat and fish. Of course, fish is great because it has omega-3s in it, and the omega-3s is anti-inflammatory. It also has DHA in it, so that's part of the omega-3 fats, and the DHA part of the omega-3s is very important for the brain's function. helps with mood, helps with depression, helps reduce anxiety. So having fish at least once a week would be a good idea. And if you can have the fatty fish, that would be even better. So the fatty fish are going to be things like salmon, mackerel, sardines, anchovies, herring. There's a choice of those things. Choose one of those at least twice a week would be good. Let's not forget the fats and the oils. Olive oil, coconut oil, MCT oil, all the avocado oils, organic butter, ghee, avocados, olives, nuts, and seeds. Be sure to knock out things like canola oil, sunflower oil, corn oil, mazola, vegetable oils, margarine. A lot of those oils have been extracted using solvents or a mechanical process called extrusion, which involves really high heat. Those oils are not great for any part of the body and certainly not great for the brain. Nut butters are also good because they're high in fat, so those would be great too. So it could be anything from almond butter, cashew butter, could be something like tahini, which is sesame. All of those have a high fat content, and so definitely good for the brain's function. And then we get to things like vegetables. And you've heard me say this often enough, the vegetables play a huge role. Cruciferous vegetables for sure. See how you feel when you've eaten a bowl of broccoli with your protein the night before. See how your mood feels the next day. With a dollop of olive oil on top of that. See how you do. But the cruciferous vegetables support many functions, and they are important for detoxification. Toxins impact the brain's function, and therefore mood, anxiety, depression, there's that link too. So if you're having those cruciferous vegetables, they also support the liver's function in clearing some of those toxins. There are some herbs and spices that are really, really important. We know things for reducing anxiety. Lemongrass is really, really good. So if you get those sticks of lemongrass, you can get them in most grocery stores now. And you put a couple of, chop them up and just steep them in some tea or some hot water and then sip it. Very good for reducing anxiety. Mint, also one of those great herbs that's very good. Nutmeg, well, there's only so much nutmeg you can consume, I think. I think it's fabulous and it's got some anti-inflammatory, but a small amount goes a long way, right? Now, rosemary is one of my favorite herbs, and you can add rosemary pretty much to anything. You can add it to savory things. You can actually add it to some of the sweet things. When I say sweet, I'm talking more like having something like adding some rosemary to some melted chocolate and some coconut oil. Very lovely, different flavors with maybe a pinch of salt in that. Those would be some different but very taste-promoting flavors. Sage, too, also good for reducing anxiety and moods and depression. But, of course, one of the best of all the herbs and spices is going to be saffron. Saffron is considered to be really important for reducing anxiety and helping with mood stabilization. So just taking a couple of those stigmas, which is what saffron is, and adding it to your foods might be a good idea. Or having a cup of saffron tea. How delicious would that be? I think that would be great. Try some of those things. Other mood foods that are important are going to be chocolate. So anything over 70%, the higher the cacao, the better you're going to be feeling with that, because it reduces the amount of sugar and dairy that's in there. Coffee has phytochemicals in it, good for helping mood and and brain function, as well as teas. So all the different types of teas, the herbal teas, the green tea especially, so matcha and other green teas would be great to use here. It's the ECG in that helps to reduce the inflammation. So if we're thinking about foods, we're thinking about what would that look like. So it would be something like eggs and avocado for breakfast. So we're talking about protein and fat. Maybe something like soup and avocado. And lunch would be salad with maybe some chicken. And if you're vegetarian, then maybe you could add some lentils. Lentils are not bad for the brain and for mood because they control blood sugar. There's not going to be too much of a spike with that. You could do maybe a lentil soup with a dollop of olive oil on top of that. Remember, olive oil and fats are great for the brain. You could have steamed vegetables with roasted vegetables, olive oil, maybe some avocado again there and some nuts on there too. And then dinner could be fish, broccoli, maybe sweet potato, a green salad. And maybe this is where you add some of the prebiotic food, like a tablespoon of sauerkraut. And then dessert could be some berries, and I really like to use some frozen berries, so it sort of feels like a bit of ice cream or sorbet. And then adding some fat to that would be a tablespoon of coconut cream or coconut milk. And that is very, very satisfying. Remember, the fat is so important for the brain. So when we think about this, sugar is a nightmare when it comes to brain function. But there's always an alternative. But there's an alternative that will get your brain in the energy it needs without all the negative side effects. And that is, of course, ketones. So what are ketones? Ketones is an efficient fuel that really replaces glucose, and it's great for brain function. And when your brain relies on ketones for energy, it performs at a higher level. It increases cognitive function, protects the brain from a variety of degenerative diseases, including things like Alzheimer's or any of the other diseases that we know. It also is a diet that doesn't favor carbs and sugar, and it steers a person away from, and it moves us into burning fat rather than glucose. So it's kind of like a ketogenic diet in a way, but the other part too is it's a low carbohydrate. So when you think about the brain, less carbohydrates is going to be more functional for the brain. So folks, thank you for joining. That's all I have for today.